Welcome fellow gamers to another video. I hope you're all sufficiently stuffed, drunk and gifted from the festive period we've just experienced. But more importantly, we're looking at some more games. This time, backwards compatibility. With both PS4 and Xbox One having a sizable and growing install base, one of the key areas for attracting more of the mass market, mums and dads effectively, is to allow little Timmy or Tammy the option to play all their old games on this new shiny box. Backwards compatibility is always, and I mean always, a much bigger case in theory than in practice, but it is still an important area to cover and can really help sales with the mental hurdle overcome. This generation is not as simple, but it has not stopped Microsoft striving ahead with a very good start and commendable attempt to remove this obstacle from within its audience. As the shift away from a power PC and more importantly an in-order CPU with a very different instruction set to the now x86-64 CPU out-of-order machine means aside extra hardware, simple software support was just not on the agenda. But these consoles do have an advantage of how they have been constructed and operate, with a virtualized environment being exactly the kind of thing emulation is designed for. To learn more about how all this works within the system and virtualization, please check out my What Are Consoles article from last year, which should help explain it in a far more detailed method. The too long did not read version is that Big M have created a complete VM of the Xbox 360 operating system included with each game, and this runs as any normal app or game as you would call it, with the Xbox One treating the entire thing as such and the emulation being handled all within the relevant hardware sets, and for all intents and purposes it thinks it's running on the Xbox 360, as it really is. But this aside, what Microsoft's engineers have achieved here is not only commendable but very solid and impressive, and hopefully it will be popular enough for them to get more time and refine the emulation process. This works by having the instruction translation handled under a wrapper with JIT methods between the layers, which as you can imagine adds some overhead. Any wrapper and real-time compile will always do that. And here a Xenon 3-core 3.2 GHz CPU is being handled by 6 or more 1.75 GHz cores with entirely different methods of operation. But the detail on all this is right for another video and not for this one. What I'm going to cover is the latest games to now hit the ever-expanding portfolio of backwards compatible titles playable from the 360 on your shiny new Xbox One. In this series I will cover each game so that they do not become too long and convoluted. This one is looking at Mass Effect, a big game on last gen, and now the first game is fully playable on the Xbox One. Starting with the raw code on the native machine of the 360, the first thing that strikes is the visual style and choices have held up well overall. Facial detail and animations are decent, and the expanse of the ships, alien design and worlds are all very well done. But performance is not so complimentary, as it runs with a VSync mostly being off across play and even cutscenes, which helps it better achieve its 30 target. But even here it can have longer dips into solid 20 or 50 millisecond frame times throughout play. This means that it is rarely at a solid or non-tearing display, and during any of the game's extensive action scenes it will either have one or most likely both of these happening at once. Now on the Xbox One, remember, this is the exact same code running under emulation, so any improvements will come from faster I/O, execution, and we tend to see areas where the GPU heavier sections run better on the X1, as here with a locked 20 section on the 360 now hitting a capped 30. But another issue, or in my case benefit, comes from this emulation, as the entire emulator involves the OS and the game as one. This means that any VSync is enabled across the board, making all games under emulation, at present at least, having the frame locked to a complete refresh cycle. Now with a game like Mass Effect, which as you have just seen tears up the screen better than a teen slasher movie, when this occurs on the X1 it will hold the buffer flip until the full frame is ready, which results in this heavier section seeing far bigger and more prolonged drops on the Xbox One. The benefit comes with a much more solid and wavy free display at the expense of a far longer frame time and thus a much lower average and performance. But let's not get confused here, the emulator can only work with the game code base and all of its issues, paths and such, and I'll run here warts and all. The game has no visual improvements over its original 360 release and is being upscaled to 1080, and although it is showing its age being 8 years old now, animation is clunky, textures are a mixed bag, but it has film grain, an acceptable motion blur if slightly overdone, but this was more common last generation, and if you have it lying around you can now play it on your Xbox One. But as is not the unsurprising case for such a woefully underperforming game, under emulation and a newly enforced VSync, it performs worse than the original release. Cutscenes can at times run better, but in general play, the 360 is the best of a bad bunch, I'm afraid. You can see the stats in the rest of this video, and I will leave you with more side-by-side footage so you can judge it for yourself. I will cover more games, with Halo Reach being the next one up, so please check that out, and much more to come thanks to the joys of backwards compatibility. As always, I hope you guys and girls enjoyed this. If you did, then please hit the like and subscribe button, as it really helps me immensely, and I appreciate each and every one of you that does. Have you played this yet? Have you tried any of the backwards compatibility games? Have you tried any on the PS4, which I'll also be looking at? Please leave your thoughts and feedbacks below, and I'll see you very soon on the next one.